Welcome to Strides to Solutions. I'm Esther Adams. Today we're exploring what might be the most profound discovery in modern mental health treatment, that your seemingly solid, seamless experience of reality is actually constructed from just three basic components, cycling so rapidly you never notice the construction. If you've ever felt trapped by anxiety that won't let go, caught in depression's endless loop, or wondered why you can intellectually understand your problems but still feel controlled by them, you're about to discover why. We're going to explore how your brain builds suffering from thoughts, sensations, and feelings, and more importantly, how recognizing this construction gives you a power that no amount of talking, analyzing, or positive thinking alone can provide. This isn't about adding another coping strategy to your toolkit. It's about seeing through the illusion that makes all suffering possible in the first place. For decades, Western psychotherapy and Eastern contemplative traditions stood on opposite sides of a chasm. Therapists focused on changing thoughts and behaviors, on understanding the narrative, on rearranging what we might call the furniture of the mind. Buddhist practitioners, meanwhile, were doing something entirely different. They were investigating the nature of the mind that holds the furniture, the space in which all experience arises and passes. What happened when these two streams finally merged has revolutionized our understanding of mental health. We discovered that while therapy can effectively rearrange problematic mental content, it often leaves people vulnerable to new problems arising from new circumstances. It's like learning to navigate one maze perfectly, only to find yourself dropped into a completely different maze. But mindfulness training offers something different: insight into how all mazes are constructed, giving you the ability to navigate any mental landscape, no matter how it changes. This isn't mystical or esoteric. It's based on recognizing three fundamental features of how your mind constructs experience, features that are hidden in plain sight, operating so quickly and automatically that they create what feels like solid, unchangeable reality. But once you see the construction, everything changes. Let me start with a simple question. What is your experience right now? If you really investigate, you'll find it's made of just three things: thoughts or mental images, sensations arriving through your senses, and a feeling tone, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, associated with each thought and sensation. That's it. Every moment of your life, from your greatest joy to your deepest suffering, is built from just these three components. But here's where it gets interesting. These components don't exist in isolation. They form cycles, rapid associational patterns that create what we experience as emotions, memories, anxiety, depression, all of it. A worried thought triggers a sensation of tightness in your chest. That unpleasant sensation triggers more worried thoughts. Those thoughts intensify the sensation. Within seconds, you're caught in what feels like solid, overwhelming anxiety. The speed of this process creates an illusion of seamlessness. You don't experience thought plus sensation plus unpleasant feeling equals anxiety. You just experience anxiety as a solid thing, as real and unchangeable as a rock. And because you can't see the construction, you can't deconstruct it. You're trapped inside something that feels absolutely real but is actually being freshly created moment by moment. This is the first principle that mindfulness reveals. Your apparently seamless experience is actually constructed from these components forming associational cycles. The richness of experience, memory, imagination, emotion, these are symphonies of these fundamental elements. But unlike a symphony you're listening to, you're both the orchestra and the conductor, though you've forgotten you're holding the baton. Now, you might think, okay, so experience is made of components. So what? How does knowing this help me when I'm in the grip of panic or depression? This is where the second principle becomes crucial. Attention is normally preoccupied with the content of these components, what thoughts mean, what sensations signify, which sustains their cycles. But with training, you can recognize these components as events occurring in awareness rather than solid realities you're trapped inside. Think about the last time you were anxious Where was your attention? Probably completely absorbed in the content of worried thoughts, playing out scenarios, trying to think your way to safety. Your attention was inside the thought, identified with it, inseparable from it. The thought wasn't something happening in your awareness, you were the thought. But what if you could shift perspective? What if instead of being lost inside the thought, what if I fail? You could recognize a thought about failure is arising in awareness. This isn't positive thinking or trying to change the thought. It's recognizing the thought as an event, like a cloud passing through the sky of awareness. This shift, what researchers call metacognitive awareness or reperceiving, changes everything. When you recognize thoughts as events rather than truths, sensations as temporary experiences rather than permanent states, feelings as passing weather rather than your identity, the cycles that create and maintain distress begin to lose their power. But here's the challenge that nobody talks about. Learning to do this runs against millions of years of evolution. This brings us to the third principle. Attention evolved to highlight threats and opportunities for need fulfillment, but the movement of attention itself isn't normally noticed. Only its objects are noticed, along with the arousal that follows. Your brain didn't evolve to make you happy. It evolved to keep you alive long enough to reproduce. In our ancestral environment, this meant constantly scanning for threats. Predators, enemies, poisonous foods. Those who were best at threat detection survived. Those who were blissfully unaware of danger didn't make it into the gene pool. Fast forward to today. The saber-toothed tigers are gone, but your brain hasn't gotten the memo. That same threat detection system that saved your ancestors is now scanning for social rejection, financial problems, health concerns, relationship issues. And because physical threats have largely disappeared, your brain has unlimited time and energy to devote to these psychological threats. This is why your mind seems to have a mind of its own. When you sit down to focus on your breath, within seconds your attention has been hijacked by worries about tomorrow's meeting or regrets about yesterday's conversation. This isn't a personal failing or lack of discipline. It's your brain doing exactly what it evolved to do, prioritizing potential threats over present moment awareness. William James wrote that, "My experience is what I agree to attend to." But here's what James didn't fully grasp. Agreement implies choice, and most of us have never realized we have a choice. Our attention moves according to ancient programs we've never examined, creating our experience without our conscious participation. The internal monologue, that endless stream of commentary, judgment, comparison, and evaluation, this is where attention defaults when not deliberately directed elsewhere. And because this monologue is primarily concerned with threat assessment and need fulfillment, it's inherently anxiety producing. Even when your life is objectively safe and comfortable, this ancient system keeps generating a sense of unease, of something wrong, of not quite enough. This is the background anxiety that drives so much of modern life. It's why we can't sit still, why we need constant stimulation, why we feel stressed, even when nothing stressful is happening. We're living inside a threat detection system that's running 24/7 with no actual threats to detect, so it manufactures them from imagination and memory. But here's the revolutionary discovery: you can learn to regulate attention. Not perfectly, not permanently, but enough to fundamentally change your relationship with your own mind. And the tool for this isn't complex, it's breath awareness. The breath has several qualities that make it ideal for attention training. First, it's always available. You can't forget it at home or run out of it. Second, for most people, it's emotionally neutral. Unlike thoughts about your relationships or work, the sensation of breathing doesn't trigger emotional cascades. Third, it's happening right now, anchoring you in present moment experience rather than past regrets or future worries. When you direct attention to breath sensations, something remarkable happens. The anxious thought sensation feeling cycles that were commanding all your attention begin to lose their grip. not because you're suppressing them or thinking positive thoughts, but because attention can only fully focus on one object at a time. When attention is on the breath, it's not fueling anxiety cycles. But don't mistake this for distraction or avoidance. This is about developing a capability you've never had, the ability to choose where your attention goes rather than being dragged around by evolutionary defaults. It's like discovering you've been living in a house where the lights turn on and off randomly, then finding out there's actually a switch you can control. The research on this is stunning. In a 4-year follow up study of people who completed mindfulness training, 94% were still using breath awareness to cope with stress, not because someone told them to, but because it works. They discovered a tool that gives them actual agency in their own mental experience. But breath awareness is just the beginning. The body scan, systematically moving attention through different parts of the body, noticing whatever sensations are present. This teaches you to differentiate between thoughts, sensations, and feelings. Most of us experience distress as an undifferentiated blob of bad feeling. The body scan teaches you to recognize there's a thought about tomorrow, there's tightness in my shoulders, there's an unpleasant feeling tone. Once you can differentiate the components, you can work with them individually rather than being overwhelmed by their combination. This isn't about relaxation, though relaxation often occurs. It's about recognition, seeing clearly what's actually happening in your experience rather than being lost in your interpretation of what's happening. It's the difference between being tumbled by a wave and standing on shore, watching waves roll in. The clinical outcomes from this kind of training are remarkable. Reductions in anxiety and depression comparable to medication, but without side effects. Decreased emotional reactivity, improved emotional regulation, enhanced interpersonal functioning. But perhaps most importantly, these benefits endure. Unlike treatments that work only while you're actively using them, mindfulness training creates lasting changes in how you relate to your own mind. Why? Because you're not just learning to manage specific symptoms, you're developing insight into how all symptoms are created and maintained. It's like the difference between learning to treat individual diseases and understanding how the immune system works. Once you understand the system, you can work with any challenge that arises. This is what therapy alone often misses. Cognitive therapy can help you change dysfunctional thoughts, but what happens when new dysfunctional thoughts arise from new situations? Psychodynamic therapy can help you understand your patterns, but understanding alone doesn't always lead to change. Behavioral therapy can help you change actions, but the underlying mental patterns often remain. Mindfulness doesn't replace these approaches. It complements them by adding a systemic dimension. You're not just rearranging the furniture of your mind, you're learning about the nature of mind itself. You're developing what we might call psychological immunity, the ability to work with whatever arises rather than being controlled by it. Let me give you a concrete example. Sarah came to therapy with severe anxiety about her health. Every sensation in her body triggered catastrophic thoughts about fatal diseases. Through cognitive therapy, she learned to challenge these thoughts, to look at evidence, to think more rationally. This helped, but every new sensation brought new fears that required new rational responses. It was exhausting. When Sarah learned mindfulness, something different happened. She learned to notice anxiety thought arising without immediately being consumed by its content. She learned to feel body sensations without immediately creating stories about what they meant. She learned to recognize the unpleasant feeling tone of anxiety without mistaking it for actual danger. She still had anxious thoughts and uncomfortable sensations, but now she had a choice about how to relate to them. She could see them as events in awareness rather than absolute truths. She could watch them arise and pass rather than being hijacked by them. The anxiety didn't disappear, but her relationship to it transformed. This is the critical distinction. Mindfulness isn't about getting rid of difficult experiences, it's about changing your relationship to them. Pain is inevitable. It's part of having a human body and brain. But suffering, the mental elaboration of pain, the resistance, the storytelling, the cycles of reactivity, this is optional. The evolutionary default is to treat every mental event as equally real and important. A thought about danger activates the same stress response as actual danger. A memory of rejection creates the same physiological response as current rejection. We live in a virtual reality created by our own minds, unable to distinguish between mental events and external realities. Mindfulness teaches you to make this distinction, to recognize thoughts as mental events, not facts, to experience sensations as temporary body states, not permanent conditions, to feel emotions as passing weather patterns, not your core identity. But here's what's crucial to understand: this isn't about detachment or dissociation, it's about clear seeing. When you can see clearly what's happening in your mind, you can respond wisely rather than react automatically. You can choose which thoughts to engage with and which to let pass. You can feel difficult emotions without being overwhelmed by them. The research shows that people who develop this capacity through mindfulness training show increased activity in brain regions associated with executive function and emotional regulation. They show decreased activity in the amygdala, the brain's alarm system. They show increased cortical thickness in areas associated with attention and sensory processing. The brain literally changes in response to this training, but more importantly, life changes. People report feeling like they've been released from an invisible prison. One patient described it as discovering I'd been wearing dark sunglasses my whole life and finally taking them off. Another said, I realized I'd been living in a movie about my life rather than actually living my life. This doesn't mean mindfulness is a panacea. Some people use it to avoid dealing with real psychological issues that need therapeutic attention. There's a phenomenon called spiritual bypassing, where people try to meditate their way around genuine trauma or relationship problems that need to be addressed directly. Mindfulness isn't a substitute for necessary psychological work. It's a complement that makes that work more effective. The integration of mindfulness into evidence based therapies like dialectical behavior therapy, mindfulness based cognitive therapy, and acceptance and commitment therapy shows how powerful this combination can be. These approaches use mindfulness not as an escape from difficult content, but as a way to create enough space to work with it effectively. In DBT, for example, mindfulness skills help people with borderline personality disorder recognize emotional states before they become overwhelming. In MBCT, mindfulness helps people with recurrent depression notice the early warning signs of relapse and interrupt the cycles before they gain momentum. In ACT, mindfulness helps people stop struggling with unwanted thoughts and feelings so they can focus on value based action. But you don't need a diagnosed condition to benefit from these insights. Everyone gets caught in thought sensation feeling cycles. Everyone's attention gets hijacked by evolutionary defaults. Everyone mistakes mental events for reality. These are universal human experiences, and the skills that address them are universally applicable. The question isn't whether you need these skills, you do. The question is whether you'll develop them intentionally or continue to be controlled by mental patterns you've never examined, whether you'll keep rearranging the furniture in a house that's on fire or learn to work with the nature of fire itself. As we close today's episode of Strides to Solutions, I want to leave you with this invitation. For the next few moments, notice your direct experience right now. Notice thoughts arising and passing. Notice sensations in your body. Notice the pleasant or unpleasant feeling tone of this moment. You've just glimpsed the construction of your reality, those three simple components that create everything from joy to despair. This isn't a practice reserved for meditation cushions or therapy offices. It's available in every moment of your life. The question isn't whether you'll experience thoughts, sensations, and feelings. You will. The question is whether you'll be aware enough to have a choice about how you relate to them. If you're ready to explore this revolutionary integration of mindfulness and psychotherapy more deeply, my book, Rescript Your Reality, offers specific exercises for developing these capacities and integrating them into daily life. Available on Amazon, it bridges the gap between understanding these principles intellectually and embodying them experientially. Remember, you don't need to be free from difficult thoughts and feelings to be free. You just need to see clearly that you are the awareness in which they arise and pass, not the temporary experiences themselves. Thank you for joining me today. Until next time, this is Esther Adams reminding you that the prison of automatic reactivity has an open door. You just need to notice you've been holding the key all along.